North Korea is stepping up its rhetoric once again in reaction to a new UN sanction over its nuclear program. A state agency said today that Pyongyang should use nuclear weapons to, quote, sink Japan and turn the United States into ashes darkness. The UN sanctions were passed this week in the wake of the country's sixth and potentially most powerful nuclear tests. Senior Fellow for Asia Society Center on U.S.-China Relations, Isaac Stone-Fish, joins me now to discuss. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So what do you make of these new threats against the United States and Japan? I mean, we've heard it all before, but is there now an edge to this because of the tensions?
I don't think there necessarily is. I think when we look at the threats, we realize they're so absurd to not actually be serious. You can't use nuclear weapons to sink a major island. That's not the way nuclear weapons work. You can't turn the United States into ashes and darkness. I think another thing North Korea said was that they were going to shoot America like the rabid dog that it is.
Right.
Not something you can really do. So I think this is a lot more of the same bluster that they like, that plays well domestically and makes them feel tough.
Here's the question that I think is on a lot of people's minds. In my interviews with military commanders, in fact, I interviewed Admiral Harry Harris, who's in charge of all of Pacific Command, and I asked him if Kim Jong-un is able to have a nuclear weapon that he can put in an ICBM, what does that mean? Practically speaking, what does that mean? Is the United States prepared to go to war with North Korea and, in that case, putting millions of South Koreans' lives at danger? Or is it what we saw when Pakistan developed the nuclear weapon? We didn't want them to. We tried to stop them from doing it, but ultimately they did. And now we live with a nuclear-armed Pakistan. Which is it?
I think bringing Pakistan into this is a great comparison. I certainly hope it's more of a Pakistan situation because a war with North Korea could be devastating, not only to millions of people of South Korea and the more than 100,000 Americans who live there, but also American troops and the American mainland and the innocent people of North Korea too. You know, it's not only the government that lives in the country, there's a lot of innocent civilians there. I think the thing that's important to remember is that North Korea is a nuclear armed state right now. We're not going to be able to probably get rid of their nuclear weapons. That's just the fact of the matter. The difference between North Korea and Pakistan is A, North Korea has been far more threatening to the United States, and B, China has a tighter relationship with North Korea. So it's a very, very complicated situation, but I think for the sake of all of us, that the Pakistan example is the one that bears out.
And to that point, Isaac, I mean, can we not, if we take the United States out of the equation, for example, and stick with our discussion about Pakistan and its nuclear weapons, right next door is India, their adversary. If you are a person from India and you now know that your adversary has a nuclear weapon, that is certainly disconcerting. 1 billion people living in India, but they've been able to thread the needle when it comes to relations between those two countries. In other words, Pakistan and India had threatened to go to war many, many times over many, many things. Yeah. Kashmir, and there's a million things that they can have issues with, but they've somehow figured out a way to coexist peacefully.
And I think that's probably the best case scenario for South Korea and North Korea and China and Japan. I mean, the other best case scenario is some sort of semi-peaceful transition of power where Kim Jong-un either liberalizes, which is incredibly unlikely, or gets overthrown in a way that doesn't bring in someone that's worse. I think this is one of those known unknowns versus unknown unknowns. If Kim Jong-un does lose power, we really have no idea what kind of elements would replace him, but I would guess that makes it more likely to have a non-nuclear solution to the situation we find ourselves in.
Something else one of the military commanders told me, in this case it was General T.J. O'Shaughnessy, who's head of Pacific Air Force. He said that all intelligence reports suggest to him that Kim Jong-un is not a madman. He's not some boy general playing at war games. He is a rational actor. He's actually very intelligent, very smart. He knows exactly what he's doing. What do you make of that assessment?
I think that's a correct assessment, and I've spoken to 1 or 2 people who have also talked to Kim Jong-un, and they're impressed by his charisma, his intelligence, his charm. Doesn't mean anything about him being a good person or a good leader, but I think we underestimate his ability to our own peril.
Yeah, and so if that is the case, if he is a rational actor, if you put if we try to look at from the perspective, his perspective, he's seen what's happened to Muammar Gaddafi. He's seen what's happened to Saddam Hussein. He's seen even what's happened in Egypt, right, over the course of since the Arab Spring. In his mind, by being as blustery as he is, by moving forward with his development of nuclear weapons, does he see it as a way to not end up like Muammar Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein in a ditch, ultimately being killed by your adversary?
Exactly, and I think the other point that's different with North Korea is they have a long history of using their offensive capability as a form of blackmail to get money out of South Korea, out of China, out of the United States. So the bigger the risk that North Korea poses, the more money that South Korea and the United States will be willing to pay to drop tensions when they reach that point. So I think it's a combination of a defensive deterrent strategy and a strategy of saying, oh yeah, okay, we'll walk back from our nukes, but we'd like you to fund development in North Korea to the tune of $10, $20 billion.
So, final question. In an interview that Steve Bannon, the president's former strategic advisor, did with our Charlie Rose, Bannon at one point said there are no military options when it comes to North Korea, seemingly to indicate that if there was a war, millions of people would die. Secretary Mattis has said the same thing. But what I think most people sometimes forget about is the ability of North Korea to sell their technology to rogue nations. How great of a threat is that? I know that people worry about war. That's certainly a possibility. But should we be more worried about them selling their technology to the Taliban, to ISIS?
I think this is one of those rare places where I agree with Bannon. There are no good military options when it comes to North Korea, and the potential for an outbreak of a war would be so much more catastrophic than North Korea selling dirty bombs or its massive stockpile of chemical weapons or even nuclear weapons to ISIS. Because if we have a war with North Korea, it's likely going to be more devastating, more destructive than even ISIS setting off an atomic bomb somewhere. So I think that's really the big worry.
Yeah, but that would be pretty devastating as well.
A lot of awfuls on the table.
And if we could somehow prevent that from happening, that would be...
That would definitely be very important too.
Absolutely. Isaac Stonefish, thank you so much for stopping by. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.